Now we're going to talk about classifying costs. All costs are either period costs or product costs. First, we'll talk about product costs. A product cost is the cost of purchasing or making a product. The cost is recorded as an asset, such as merchandise inventory. Later, when the product is sold, it's expensed by transferring the cost to cost of goods sold. Product costs are sometimes called inventoriable costs because they are considered inventory before becoming cost of goods sold when sold. Some examples of product costs. If the company is a merchandiser like a grocery store, a product cost is simply the cost of the product they purchased that they later plan to sell. If the company is a manufacturer, which means they make their own products, the product costs are the costs to make the product. Things such as parts to build a car or the ingredients used to bake a cake are product costs. Other examples of product costs include the salaries of the workers who build the products and the costs to run the factory, such as factory utilities, factory depreciation, factory insurance, the factory supervisor's salary, and the factory janitor's wages. Product costs are listed on the balance sheet as inventory, which is a current asset. But when the product is sold, the cost transfers from inventory to the expense account called cost of goods sold. All other costs are period costs. These are costs that are expensed in the accounting period in which they occurred. Examples include sales staff salaries, advertising, store utilities, and store rent. Notice these period costs are not costs associated with buying or making a product. For example, store rent is a period cost because the store's purpose is not to make the product, nor is it a cost of obtaining the product. The store's purpose is to sell the product, or to sell a service if it's a service company. Now, if the rent expense was for the factory, then factory rent is a product cost because the factory's purpose is to manufacture the product. Period costs are found on the income statement under selling and administrative expenses. So to summarize, service companies do not sell products, so all of their costs are period costs. Merchandisers and manufacturing companies have products, so they have both period costs and product costs. For a merchandiser, product costs are the cost of the merchandise and all the costs associated with obtaining the merchandise, such as shipping costs, sometimes called freight in. For a manufacturer, product costs are the costs of making the product. And finally, product costs are accumulated in an inventory account until the product is sold, in which case the cost is transferred out of the inventory account and into cost of goods sold. So once again, let's look at the financial statements of a service company and a merchandising company. And this time we're going to try to identify which expenses are period costs and which are product costs. Looking at the merchandiser's balance sheet in the lower right corner, can you find the product costs? Any cost that was associated with the merchandise that they purchased, such as the cost of the merchandise and any shipping costs, would be part of the cost of inventory. These are product costs. Now look at the merchandiser's income statement in the upper right corner of the screen. Do you see any product costs? When the merchandise is sold, the inventory cost is transferred to COGS, cost of goods sold, and this is an expense. So COGS is a product cost. It's the cost of the products that were sold. Still looking at the merchandiser's income statement in the upper right corner, do you see any period costs? The merchandiser also has costs that are not associated with the product, such as the salesperson's salaries, the accountant's salary, the store's utility expenses, depreciation on the store's shelves, etc. These non-product costs would be considered period costs and would appear in the selling and administrative expenses section. Looking at the service company's income statement now, are their expenses period costs or product costs? A service company doesn't sell products, so all of their expenses are period costs. They are not associated with the product, therefore they are simply expense in the period in which they occurred. So this video is part 1 in showing how costs are classified. In a future video, I'll show you how product costs can be broken down even further.